This house is full. That's what my mother said the night I brought my wife and 5-year-old son back, hoping to stay after losing everything. But it didn't stop there. My older brother looked at me like I was a burden and said something I can still remember word for word. Lend you money with what? How are you going to pay me back? That night, I had no answer for either of them. I just turned around and walked away empty-handed, carrying nothing but a deep wound in my heart and the mess I had made. But a few months later, with $25 million in hand, I finally had the chance to respond to all of it once and for all. My name is Michael Johnson, 30 years old. A year ago, my wife, our young son, and I were living in Gainesville, a quiet mountain town in northern Georgia. The place is known for its poultry farms, endless cornfields stretching to the horizon, and winding red dirt roads I could navigate with my eyes closed. At 30, I wasn't what most people would call successful. I didn't have a fancy house, a luxury car, or designer clothes. But I had something far more valuable, a small family, a piece of land I built up with my own 2 hands, and a belief that if I worked hard enough, long enough, things would eventually be okay. I'm the second son of a working-class family with just 2 boys. My older brother, David, is 3 years older than me. Since we were kids, he was always seen as the heir of the family, strong, sharp, the one expected to follow in our father's footsteps. Me, I was the one they called too sentimental. I loved plants and animals and spent hours buried in books about soil, fertilizer, and modern farming techniques, stuff nobody else cared about. At 18, I chose to study agricultural science at the University of Georgia. During those college years, I took on every kind of labor job I could find, anything that would help me pay tuition without being a burden to anyone. I didn't have anyone opening doors for me, but I believed that if I learned enough and understood, someday I'd be able to do something worth being proud of. After graduating with honors, I came back home and started my first venture with a $200,000 bank loan, a number significant enough to keep me up for a week after signing the papers. I was approved for that loan because of my degree and my participation in a USDA-funded community program, which helped get my application into a priority category for local agricultural development. I also had a friend who worked as a loan officer at a small rural bank near home. He believed I was the kind of guy who walks the talk. And sometimes all it takes is one person who believes in you to get the future rolling. With the money, I set out to chase my dream. The land I bought wasn't big, just enough space to build 3 rows of chicken coops, dig a deep well, and put up a small wooden house on the edge of a hill. Nothing fancy, but it was a start. My start. Back then, I raised those chickens like they were my firstborn. I mixed the feed by hand, tracked every temperature reading in the coops, and noted even the most minor changes if one of them stopped eating. In the winter, I scrambled to hang up tarps. In the summer, I spread lime to prevent bird flu. During the first few months, I barely slept more than 3 hours a night, but farming doesn't always go smoothly. Some months, everything ran like a well-oiled machine, healthy birds, stable egg prices, reliable payments from partners. But it only took a long stretch of rain or a sudden market crash from an outbreak reported somewhere, and all that work could be wiped out overnight. There were months I made a decent profit, enough to pay the bank and buy a little toy for James, my son. And there were months I had to pawn my wedding ring to keep the lights on in the chicken coops. After each rough patch, I reminded myself not to let the numbers make me forget why I started. I wasn't doing this to prove anything to the world. I was doing it for Emily, my wife, for James, and because this little family was all I had left. Every Monday morning, I'd stand on the wooden porch and watch Emily wrap a scarf around James before taking him to the clinic. Emily had no family, no parents, no relatives to turn to. She grew up in the foster care system down in South Georgia. I met her at a small agricultural fair in Monroe. She was running a booth selling handmade honey for a local farm. I was just a rookie farmer back then. Behind her quiet smile was a kind of stillness I'd never seen in anyone else. Maybe that's why I fell for her so fast. I couldn't explain it even to myself. Not long after we started dating, we got married. It was a simple outdoor ceremony, just a few friends and a promise that didn't need fancy words. What Emily and I had was never a fairy tale kind of romance. It was companionship, the kind where you can sit in silence together and still feel at peace. Our son, James Johnson, was born on a sweltering day in September. He came early, premature, and his lungs were weak. He spent nearly 3 weeks in an incubator. Later, doctors diagnosed him with chronic pneumonia and congenital asthma. He couldn't play football, couldn't run in the rain, and every winter felt like a season we had to survive. On the nights James had coughing fits, it was always Emily who stayed up. I'd seen her fall asleep sitting by his bed, still holding the nebulizer tube in her hand. Many times, I'd tell her to get some rest and let me take over, but she'd shake her head, smile, and say, "You've been working all day. Let me." I've got this. Through it all, we had no one but each other. No in-laws to call on, no wealthy relatives to lean on. This farm, no matter how rough it got, was the only thing keeping us together. It was the one place we could hold on to when everything else out there seemed like it could fall apart. So, no matter how many setbacks we faced, no matter how many times the bank threatened foreclosure, no matter how often James ended up in the hospital, I held on. Not out of pride, but because I knew that if we lost this place, I wouldn't just be losing land. I'd be losing the only place we'd ever called home. But then, once again, life pushed me into a corner. It was about a year ago in March when news started spreading about a new outbreak of avian flu H5N1. At first, I didn't think much of it. Warnings like that come around every year. But this time was different. Within 2 weeks, poultry farms around the region started getting hit one by one. A farm down in southern Hall County had to destroy over 15,000 chickens in a single afternoon after a state agriculture inspection. I was scared it would be my turn sooner or later, and I was right. That morning, like always, I went to check the coops. As I stepped into the second one, I spotted 3 hens lying still in the corner. One was trembling, mouth wide open, eyes glazed over. I knew that look. By noon, I called the USDA rep, they came out, ran tests, and 2 days later, I got the official word. The entire flock had to be culled. After the inspection, more than 7,000 chickens were gone. Just like that, as if they'd never existed. They didn't die from the virus. They were destroyed because of policy. Once you get a positive result, the entire flock is considered high risk and must be wiped out to protect the supply chain. That day, I stood and watched as the trucks hauled the cages off the farm. I felt empty. All my income, all my investment, gone in a single day. The government offered some compensation, but what the USDA paid barely covered a fraction of the bird's value, let alone feed, labor, or operating costs. And of course, no one covered the profits I lost. In the days that followed, I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself. After the culling, there was cleanup to do, coops to clear out, lime to spread, disinfectant to spray, quarantine barriers to tear down. The sky was gray that day, the ground slick with mud. I was trying to move an old hay compactor into the corner of the coop to speed things up when I stepped wrong. My left foot caught on a steel frame bar, and then everything went white. I don't remember exactly how I fell. All I can recall is the sharp crack inside my head when my knee twisted under my weight. I screamed, but the coops were almost 100 yards from the house. And that morning, I hadn't brought my phone. After the fall, I dragged myself across the wet, slippery grass, palms pressing into the mud, pulling my left leg behind me as pain shot through my whole body. Every foot forward sent my heart racing, sweat pouring like I was burning up from a fever. I don't know how long it took to make it back to the porch. All I remember is the moment I reached for the door and heard the sound of a small truck turning into the driveway. It was Emily. She had just returned from taking James to his doctor's appointment. When she saw me collapse by the steps, soaked and pale, she dropped the medicine bag onto the seat and rushed to lift me, not even stopping to ask what happened. James ran up behind her, scared out of his mind, yelling, "Daddy." 10 minutes later, we were on the road to the regional hospital. I was barely conscious from the pain and exhaustion. The results after imaging showed a torn ACL and cartilage damage. I needed surgery and at least 3 months of rehab. The total cost, surgery, hospital stay, and physical therapy, was estimated at over $42,000. Thankfully, I still had my health insurance, the one I almost canceled a year ago to cut expenses. That policy covered over 75% of the bill. Emily paid the rest using a mix of credit cards and a chunk from the emergency savings fund we'd set aside for James. During my hospital stay, Emily never left my side. She took care of James, wheeled me to scans, and sat through physical therapy sessions. One night, I woke up at 3 a.m. and saw her still sitting beside me, holding an ice pack to my knee. Her eyes were heavy, rimmed with dark circles, but she didn't say a word of complaint. James, too. He brought his box of crayons into the hospital room and sat next to my bed, drawing chickens with big grins and ladybug wings. "Don't worry, Daddy," he said in a soft but steady voice. "When you get better, we'll raise chickens again." It was moments like those that kept me from falling apart. My body hurt, and the future felt like a dark fog. But as long as I had them, I still had a reason to get back up. 3 weeks after the surgery, I returned to the farm with a wooden crutch under my arm. No more roosters were crowing at dawn. No fresh feed smell. No clatter of feeding trays. Just empty coops and a fine layer of dust settled evenly across every wooden beam like a silent farewell. Each day, the bills kept coming: electricity, water, James's medicine, physical therapy sessions, the portable nebulizer for his asthma attacks. All of it weighed on Emily's shoulders. I tried asking the bank for another extension on the loan. Still, after 2 grace periods, they gave a final answer: either reinvest and show proof of operational capacity within 60 days or forfeit the property. Right then, I knew we were out of time. We started packing, sold off anything we could: the generator, feed grinder, heat lamps, even the deep freezer Emily used to store winter food. We held on to just one thing: the pickup truck. Old, low to the ground, with a broken AC that hadn't worked in 2 years. But it was the only vehicle we had left. Altogether, we managed to scrape together about $6,000, enough to pay off the credit card debt and 3 overdue medical bills. But the original $200,000 farm loan, even though I'd made regular payments in the early years, once James's hospital visits became frequent and the farm started bleeding money, I could only afford the interest. By the time everything fell apart, we still owed over $130,000, including late fees and penalties. We had nothing left to leverage: no wealthy relatives, no hidden savings, just the 3 of us in a house on the verge of being taken and a pile of debt collection letters with red stamps scattered across the old wooden table. I looked back at that chicken farm, once a dream, a refuge, the only place I ever dared to call home. The bank officially repossessed it in the 8th week after my fall. We had nowhere to go. So, we climbed into that old weathered pickup, the same truck that had been my workhorse for years. It didn't run smoothly, but it was enough to carry us away from what used to be everything. From that point on, it would be our kitchen, our bedroom, and our lifeline as we tried to survive the summer ahead. 5 days after we left the farm, I had nowhere left to go. We'd been parking behind a local church, but people had started to notice. One morning, a staff member tapped on the truck window. His tone was polite but distant. "I know your family hasn't caused any trouble, but we can't allow overnight parking here for long." I nodded and thanked him, but inside, my mind was a tangled mess. We tried a few free campgrounds, but the heat was brutal, and James had started struggling to breathe. Emily kept calm on the outside, but I could see the hope draining from her eyes. James didn't even ask, "Are we going home yet, Dad?" anymore. He just stayed quiet, curled up in his mother's arms when night fell. That night, I sat alone behind the steering wheel, staring into the vast dark sky, caught between shame and desperation. Over the years, I'd still sent money back every Thanksgiving, sometimes a holiday gift basket at Christmas, not out of affection, but because I didn't want to be ungrateful. Still, I'd never called, never once went back to the old house. I avoided it all: the awkwardness, the feeling of being a stranger in my own family. But this time was different. It wasn't about being forgiven. It wasn't about being accepted. It was about Emily and James. They needed a roof, a place to breathe. And if that meant knocking on the door of a home that once broke me, I had to try. When he finished, I turned to David. He gave a half shrug and a cold smirk, like it was just common sense. I had nothing left to lose. So, I asked one more time, this time with every ounce of calm I had left. "If we can't stay, could you maybe lend us a little money? Just a few hundred so we can get by for now. I'll pay it back." Before my parents could even speak, David cut in, his voice lazy but full of mockery. "Lend you money with what? How are you going to pay me back?" It hit like a blade. I gave a quiet, hollow laugh, too tired to be angry. No one said another word. David stepped forward and gently but deliberately closed the door. He nudged our mother back inside, then turned his back like the whole conversation had never happened. I turned and strolled down the porch steps. Emily followed silently. James was still asleep in her arms. When I opened the truck door, a gust of hot air hit my face. But it didn't hurt nearly as much as realizing that the house I once called home was now just an address where the 3 of us no longer belonged. That afternoon, after leaving my parents' house, I drove for almost an hour with no real direction. I didn't know where I was going. There's no place on a map called temporary shelter for those who've lost everything. I thought about trying a Walmart parking lot or maybe a campground near town, but every one of them had signs: no overnight parking. The only place that hadn't kicked us out right away was the dirt lot behind Hope Baptist Church, the one where we'd stayed a few nights before. I didn't go back there because I wanted to. I went back because, at the very least, Emily could lay her head down without fear of being chased off in the middle of the night. And James, he'd actually slept there once, for a sick child. That counted as safe. That night, Emily didn't say a word. She quietly laid James down across the back seat, covered him with a thin blanket, and sat beside him in silence. I turned off the engine, cracked the windows to let the air move, and leaned my elbows on the steering wheel, feeling empty. From the back of the truck, I started hearing James wheezing. Emily placed a hand on his forehead, then looked over at me. Her eyes, usually calm even in chaos, were starting to show cracks. "He's burning up," she whispered. "I think he's got a fever." I turned and looked at the back seat. James's cheeks were flushed, his lips dry. Every breath looked like it took effort. And there we were, parked in a patch of dirt in the middle of the night in a truck, slowly running out of hope. Just as we were digging through an old box, searching for fever medicine, a thermometer, and some wipes for James, my phone started ringing. A video call. The name on the screen stopped me cold, Robert Miller. I hesitated, then hit accept. Robert's face appeared, squinting slightly under the overhead light behind him. Michael? He raised an eyebrow. I just saw the news about the outbreak in Gainesville. Was that your farm? I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, all gone. Lost everything. Damn, Robert exhaled, shaking his head. Saw the article and figured I should check in, see if you're okay. Without thinking, I turned the phone slightly, the camera sweeping across the inside of the truck. The streetlight outside cast a dull glow on the back seat where Emily was fanning James with her hand, and the boy let out a soft moan, his face flushed red. Robert squinted. Wait, where are you right now? I paused, then answered slowly. In the truck behind a church, just for now. Your son, is he all right? Robert leaned forward, trying to get a better look. No, I said quietly. He's got a fever. We're trying to bring it down. If it gets worse, I'll take him to the ER. Robert didn't respond right away. For 2 seconds, his face went from stunned to serious, then firm. Send me your location, he said. I'm coming to you right now. 30 minutes later, the headlights of an SUV swept across the empty lot, cutting straight through our windshield. I sat up in the driver's seat. Before I could even open the door, Robert was already out of his vehicle, slamming the door shut and striding toward me with a look I hadn't seen on his face since our college days. He didn't say a word, just shot me a glance, then moved straight to the back of the truck and opened the rear door. Emily looked up. She didn't speak either, but the shimmer in her eyes told Robert everything he needed to know. This was serious. Get in, he said. His voice was blunt but firm. We're taking the boy to the hospital. Everything else can wait. I nodded, lifting James gently from Emily's arms. His body was burning hot, his little hands weakly clinging to my neck. Emily gripped my wrist tight for a second, then let go. Go, she whispered. I'll follow behind in our truck. We sped off into the night down long, quiet back roads where even the streetlights looked like they were asleep. Robert didn't ask anything else. He knew I didn't have the energy to answer. Every so often, I caught his eyes in the rearview mirror, locked onto the road, steady and storming. It wasn't me he was angry at. It was the whole damn situation. At the county hospital, I carried James into the emergency room. Robert walked straight to the front desk, pulled out his credit card, and handed it over without saying a word. When the nurse asked, relationship to the patient, he replied, friend. Just don't make the kid wait. While we waited for results, I sank onto a bench, my whole body aching from my shoulders to my spine. Robert handed me a bottle of water and a sandwich from the vending machine. I looked at him silently. He didn't expect me to say anything. By morning, James's fever had gone down. The doctor said there were no serious complications. They just needed a few days of monitoring and a cool, clean place to rest. I stood by the hospital window, watching the morning light filter through the glass, still not sure how we'd made it through the night. Robert leaned against the wall and said, I've got a place. My cousin raises goats out in Rome, Georgia. He's older now and barely uses the house. He's got 3 bedrooms. One of them's empty. I already called. You, your wife, and the boy can stay there. I turned to look at him, my throat tightening. Free, Robert added. No strings, no end date. If you can get back on your feet, great. If not, stay. I'm not letting you go through this alone. I bowed my head, gripping the coffee cup to keep my hands from shaking. Robert gave my shoulder a light tap. Back in the day, if you hadn't handed me $3,000 to get my mom into treatment, I probably wouldn't be standing here now. I haven't forgotten. Now it's my turn. 2 days later, right after James was discharged from the hospital, we followed Robert's car to his uncle's goat farm, a vast stretch of land about 15 minutes outside of downtown Rome, Georgia. The road was rough and red with clay, flanked tightly by trees, and the house seemed like part of the woods itself, quiet, rustic, and humble. The house wasn't big, but it felt solid. The roof tiles were weathered silver, and the wooden floors creaked under every step. Robert's uncle, a wiry older man with snow-white hair, looked at us for a long moment before giving a simple nod. Room at the end of the hall, he said. Ceiling fan works. Water pressure is weak, but it gets hot. Then he turned and went back to tending his goats in the yard, like having 3 strangers move in was nothing worth commenting on. I carried James into the room first and laid him gently on the bed. He was still wheezing, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Emily quietly opened the window to let in some air, then sat beside him, wiping the sweat from his brow with the same tender hand she'd used since the day he was born. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtain, casting a soft glow on our boy's messy hair. It was the first moment in weeks that I felt like we'd found something close to peace. We didn't bring much with us, a few bags of clothes, James's medicine, and one plastic bin filled with his toys, the last thing I placed in the corner of the room as if it could hold on to a bit of what normal used to mean. James pulled out each toy, lining them up neatly by the foot of the bed, quietly humming a tune I didn't recognize. Maybe it was something his preschool teacher had taught him. Or maybe it was just his way of comforting himself. By late morning the next day, Robert came back. He brought a few bags of groceries, a pack of backup diapers for James, and a thick envelope that he set down on the table in front of me. I looked at him, my brow furrowed. "What's this?" "Take it," Robert said, his voice softer than usual. I opened the envelope. Inside was $6,000 in cash. I gripped the edge of it tightly, then looked up at Robert. But before I could ask, he spoke. "6 years ago, you gave me $3,000 without asking why. Back then, my mom had just been diagnosed with cancer. No insurance, no coverage. You emptied your account and handed it over that same night. When I tried to pay it back, you said just leave it." I went still. That memory, one I thought had long since faded, came rushing back, sharp and painful, like it had just happened yesterday. "Now I'm giving it back," he continued. "Double. Not because I owe you, but because I'm not going to sit by while your kid sleeps in a truck, the way you once made sure my family didn't have to." I didn't say anything. I just lowered my head, both hands gripping the envelope like it was the only thing keeping me upright. And maybe, in a way, it was. Before leaving, Robert gave my shoulder a light tap. "Let's call it even. But if you need more, I'm still here. You don't have to carry this alone." I walked him to the door. When the wooden door clicked shut behind him, I stood on the porch for a long time, envelope still in hand, not sure where to put it down. $6,000 isn't enough to change a life. But right now, it was everything, solid ground, a breath of warmth, and proof that sometimes family isn't who you're born to. It's who shows up. Sometimes kindness comes from the right person at the exact right moment. We stayed on and worked at the goat farm. Then, 2 weeks later, on a quiet Friday afternoon, while I was bent over, tying down the back fence behind the goat shed, Emily suddenly came running out of the house. Her steps were rushed, so fast she nearly tripped on the porch steps. Michael, come here right now." Her voice wasn't the kind used for something small. It had that sharp edge, the kind that makes your heart skip. For a second, I thought something had happened to James. I dropped the rope and hurried up the porch. "What is it? Is he okay?" Emily held out a thin, slightly crumpled piece of paper. Her face had gone pale, and her hands were shaking as she held it up. "No, I was cleaning out James's medicine box. Some of the old prescriptions were stuck together. When I peeled them apart, I found this in between. It's a lottery ticket, isn't it?" One glance, and I knew exactly what it was. That Powerball ticket. I bought it at a roadside gas station just after we left the farm over a month ago. I'd stopped to fill up and had precisely $2 left in my wallet. The lottery counter was still lit. I didn't think much. I just picked a quick set of numbers, like tossing a coin in a wishing well or calling out to the universe with one last desperate breath. "Yeah, must be from back then," I said, frowning. "Why'd you pull it out?" Emily swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I checked it, Michael. It's a winner." I froze. My chest tightened. My voice stammered. "What? How much?" "Jackpot," she said, trembling. $25 million. My heart seemed to drop and catch fire all at once. I snatched the ticket from her hand, pulled my phone from my pocket, and opened the Georgia Lottery website. My hand shook so badly that I typed the wrong URL twice. Finally, I got to the right page. I checked the numbers, rechecked, then again, not once, not twice, but at least 5 times. They matched. They all matched. I turned to Emily, barely able to speak. "Slap me." She blinked. "What?" "Slap me quick. I need to know I'm not dreaming." She hesitated, then raised her hand. Smack. It was just hard enough to sting. I sank onto the porch step, the ticket falling onto my thigh. Emily sat down next to me, hands over her face, not screaming, not crying, just shaking like someone who'd barely outrun a tornado. "I almost threw it out," she choked. I was about to toss the whole pile. I didn't say anything. I just took her hand and held it tight, eyes staring out into the dark woods ahead, past the silence, past the trees, toward the wide-open sky full of stars. It felt like, just this once, the universe had bent low enough to touch us. And for one fleeting, impossible moment, it stood on the side of those who refused to give up. A week later, I stood on the homepage of the Georgia Lottery website, holding one of those oversized checks, surrounded by bright lights and the constant click of cameras. They told me to smile, but I didn't. I just nodded, a quiet nod from someone who had long run out of tears. From a man who no longer had anything left to prove. No one in that room knew about the old pickup truck that had been home to 3 people for more nights than I care to count. No one saw a 5-year-old boy wheezing for air in the heat of the night while his parents sat frozen, helpless, praying for morning to come just a little faster. No one heard the voice of a man who once lost everything, who once knocked on the door of his childhood home only to be turned away, who once nearly gave up until one day his wife walked in holding a forgotten lottery ticket, and all he could say was, "Slap me, so I know I'm not dreaming." 3 days after the lottery ceremony, just as I'd finished feeding the goats and was dragging the hose down to the lower pasture, I heard the sound of an engine rumbling up the dirt road leading to the farm. I looked up, squinting through the late afternoon sun and the cloud of red dust rising behind it. A silver-gray SUV slowly pulled up to the gate. The license plate was familiar, but it still took me a few seconds to believe what I was seeing. 3 people got out, my father, my mother, and David. Seeing them, 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, but one stuck harder than the rest. I never thought they'd actually find me. It turned out all the public details, the name, the city, the photos from the lottery press release, were enough for them to track me down. My mother stepped out first, holding a paper grocery bag with a familiar supermarket logo. I recognized the same brand of cookies she used to buy during the holidays. "I brought some snacks," she said with a soft smile, like she was pleased to see me. My father followed, hands in his pockets. David trailed behind, empty-handed, half smiling with that same shrugging confidence he always wore like a jacket. I set the hose down and strolled to the gate, saying nothing. My eyes stayed steady, but inside, everything was still. "Michael," my mother began, her voice quick and careful, like she was afraid I'd turn away before she could finish. "I saw the news. Then your name came up on TV. I was so happy, you know." I gave a slight nod, said nothing. "Is Emily doing okay?" she asked, glancing toward the house like she hoped to catch a glimpse of someone behind the window. I nodded again. "And James?" my father chimed in. "How's the boy? Still having those coughing spells?" I looked at him for a few seconds, then replied flatly, "He's still breathing, still alive. Same as before." David chuckled under his breath. "I saw your wife in those pictures online. She seemed sweet, strong, too. You did better than I expected." I didn't answer, but the look I gave him said enough, "Better because I'm nothing like you." They stood around for a while longer, exchanging glances like they were stalling. Then my father cleared his throat, shifting the tone. "Actually," he began, trying to sound casual, "your brother's got a big real estate opportunity up north. Zoned land. Great prospects, but he's short on capital." David crossed his arms and nodded, taking over. "If you could help cover part of the investment, we'd all benefit. You know, family business. Profits stay in the circle." I didn't respond right away. I just stared at him for a long moment and tilted my head, like I was genuinely considering it. Silence stretched between us. Then I let out a small, cold smile, not joy, not anger, just clarity. "You want me to loan you money?" David shrugged. "If it makes sense to you. Hell, gift it if you want." I nodded slowly, locked eyes with him, and then, in a voice calm and steady, I spoke the words like nailing them into the ground. "Loan you money with what? How are you going to pay me back?" It wasn't a question. It was a blade, clean, sharp, and aimed straight at the wound. David froze. My mother furrowed her brow. My father looked away, pretending to study the trees. I kept my hand resting on the wooden gate, standing tall, not angry, just clear. "The day I showed up at your house with my wife and son, when I had nowhere else to go, you stood right there, arms crossed just like now, and said to me, 'Lend you money? With what are you going to pay me back?'" I looked him dead in the eye, then repeated it word for word. This time, our roles reversed. "Loan you money with what? How are you going to pay me back?" No one said a word, only the wind across the dry grass and the faint clatter of a goat's horn scraping the fence in the distance. I unlatched the gate but didn't step out. Didn't invite them in. Instead, I continued, "Back then, I didn't need money. I needed a place to sleep, a blanket, a cup of warm water for my wife, a space for my son to breathe without crying through the night out of fear of bothering someone." My voice dropped, not softer, but heavier, like dragging a saw through wet wood. "Now I'm not poor anymore. But that doesn't mean I've forgotten who closed the first door on me." I bent down, picked up the grocery bag my mother brought, and gently set it on the fence, not thrown, but not accepted either. "Thanks for the cookies," I said. "But we're not going hungry anymore." My father gave a slight nod. David pressed his lips together. My mother looked down at the ground. No more words left. I turned and walked back toward the house. They stood there a bit longer, then got back in their SUV and drove away, dust trailing behind them, swallowed by the red road. Inside me, there was no anger, only clarity. A quiet, settled truth, like the last room in a house finally swept clean. Some doors, once they close, stay closed. No matter who comes knocking. 2 weeks after the lottery win, I was still living at the goat farm. I hadn't moved out yet, not because I was holding on to the place, but because I owed it something. I owed it to the quiet air at dawn. I owed it to the simple meals with my wife and son, meals we could now eat without counting every last dollar. And most of all, I owed it to Uncle John, the man who opened his door without asking why, without demanding anything in return. He was still the same, every morning out at the pens, coffee thermos in hand, mumbling to the goats like they were longtime coworkers. When he found out I'd won the lottery, he just raised an eyebrow, gave me a half-smile, and patted me on the back like it was no big deal. Good. Long as you remember to live decently. I remember, and I'll never forget. Once the verification process was done, I was given a choice: take the full winnings in installments over 30 years or a lump sum cash payout. I chose the lump sum, more practical, more certain. The total jackpot was $25 million, but after federal withholding of 24% and nearly 6% from the state of Georgia, my take-home cash was just over $10 million. For the first time in my life, I had enough to do good without having to ask permission first. I hired an independent financial advisor, someone Robert personally recommended, a retired man who lived 40 minutes away, wore flannel shirts, and whose first question wasn't, "What do you want to invest in?" but rather, "What do you want to keep?" Under his guidance, I set up a private trust for James so that when he's grown, he can choose his future without trading his health or his tears to get there. I bought Emily a small cabin on the edge of town near the woods. It has a wide porch and a garden out back. It's not flashy, but it's peaceful. No more judgmental stares. No more fear when our boy coughs in the middle of the night. As for the rest, I didn't put it in the stock market. I didn't want to be richer. I wanted to be safer. A small organic farm broke ground, a new beginning on a piece of land Robert helped me find, about half an hour from the goat farm. And then, on a crisp fall morning, Emily, James, and I packed up and left Uncle John's. There wasn't much in the truck. We hadn't bought much. And honestly, we didn't feel the need. Before we left, I walked out to the back pen where Uncle John was feeding the goats. "I'll be back," I told him, looking him in the eye with what I promised you. He didn't look back. He just gave a short nod and a wave, like a father sending his kid out into the world. After we'd settled into the new house, I asked Robert to meet me back at the goat farm on a foggy morning about 2 weeks later. Not because I needed anything, but because I knew some debts can't be paid with a simple thank you. And some people, when they show up at precisely the right moment in your life, deserve something in return, whether they ask for it or not. Robert arrived early. He was already waiting in the yard, leaning against the old wooden railing by the side of the house. One hand held a cup of coffee, the other gently rubbed a scratch on the forehead of the farm's most stubborn goat. I stepped out of the truck holding a small envelope, no gift baskets, no fancy pastries, no words wrapped in ribbons, just a check, handwritten, signed, clear as day for $1 million. I handed it to him for the one who opened the door when the rest of the world slammed it shut. Robert didn't take it right away. He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head and frowned. "You know how I am," he said. "I'm not great at accepting thank yous on paper, especially not for something I don't think I earned." I placed the envelope in his hand. $1 million, no strings, just your share of this journey. He looked at the check, flipped it once, then let out a breath. "Michael," he said slowly, "if you really want to make me happy, take this money and start a fund for kids like James. The ones without parents crazy enough to drive through the night looking for a hospital. The sick ones, the poor ones, the ones no one calls for." He paused, then looked back at me, the corner of his mouth lifting just a little. "My mama used to say, it's easy to have someone owe you, but keeping someone around who remembers what they owe? That's the kind worth keeping. We helped you back when you fell off that scaffold, but the way you paid it back, cleaning out your bank account, handing it over without a word, I've never forgotten that. You don't owe me a damn thing. You're just living the way someone once lived for you." I looked at him, and my chest tightened, not from rejection, but from being understood, from knowing he was right. I nodded. "All right, then. A fund for kids with chronic illness. We'll call it the Miller Kids Fund. I'll borrow your name to give those kids one more shot at breathing easy." Robert didn't say another word. He just gave my shoulder a quiet squeeze before walking away. Through the fading fog, I watched his figure disappear behind the rows of pens where the goats kept chewing grass without care, completely unaware that something good, something lasting, had just been planted right there in the dirt where everything else had once fallen apart. Before leaving the farm for good, I made one last stop to see Mr. John, the man who had taken in me, my wife, and my son James for more than a month, asking for nothing in return. When I found him, he was sitting on a plastic chair out on the porch, holding a can of soda, wearing that same old baseball cap I used to borrow back when I was herding goats for him during those first hard days. I walked up, nodded respectfully, and said, "Mr. John, I'm not here empty-handed today." I took out another check, also for $1 million, and placed it gently on the weathered wooden table in front of him. "This is something I wanted to leave behind for opening your door without asking what I had in my wallet, just asking what time I wanted breakfast." He didn't look at the check. He just sipped his soda and said quietly, "Michael, you came here as a stranger, but I didn't open that door out of pity. I opened it because I saw something in your wife's eyes, something steady, something rare, and because of your little boy." I stayed silent, listening. Then he slid the check back across the table and added, "Keep it. But if you really want to do something good with it, there's another way." I looked up. He met my gaze and continued, "Use it to start a fund for small farmers, the ones raising goats, chickens, strawberries, the ones who wake up every day battling disease, bad weather, feed prices, and bank debt." His voice wasn't loud, but every word carried the weight of years spent watching things fall apart and still waking up the next day to try again. "I don't need money. I need to know that the next time someone like you comes knocking, more doors will open." After that, I didn't say another word. I just bowed my head. He gave my shoulder a gentle pat, like a father comforting his son, then got up and walked off into the fog. On the drive back, I kept both checks, not because I couldn't let go, but because I had just been taught a deeper way to give, a way that doesn't make someone feel smaller. And that's when I understood, for some people, money isn't what they need most. What they need is to know that somewhere in this world, there are still people who live with grace and remember what it means to be human. After everything, I thought it was all behind me until one December afternoon while I was out watering the plants in the yard. That same silver-gray SUV pulled up to the gate once more. This time, there were no cookies, no small talk, no forced, fragile smiles. David stepped out first, face flushed, eyes burning like he wanted to punch the air to feel something break. My mother followed, her expression stripped of politeness, and my father stayed by the car, arms planted on his hips, raising his voice before I could even reach the gate. "So, you've got $2 million for some ridiculous charity, but not a single damn cent for your own family." I stood still. That morning, the local paper had run a story about the new charitable foundation I'd launched to support children with chronic illnesses and small farms hit by disasters. The article showed a photo of me handing over a symbolic check at a children's hospital, along with a quote, "I want to help the people who never closed their doors on me." Maybe that was the spark that lit the fuse. And maybe they were here for the last time, and they knew it. Behind my father, my mother stepped forward, voice sharp. "We're your family, Michael, flesh and blood, and you're giving all that money to strangers." David wasn't far behind. He walked up, jabbing a finger at my chest. "You're a damn ungrateful bastard. Got your money and now you think you're better than us." I didn't respond, not out of fear, but because there was simply nothing left to say. I took out my phone, calm as ever, and dialed. "Michael, are you even listening?" David shouted. "That $2 million should have gone to the family, not to a bunch of sick goats and kids you don't even know." I turned toward him, my voice low and even. "The police will be here in 10 minutes. I just reported a disturbance and verbal threats outside a private residence. This property is under my name. My family is inside, my wife is scared, my son is asleep, and there are security cameras watching everything." I paused for a breath, then looked my mother in the eye. "And my lawyer will be filing for a no-contact order against every one of you." My mother froze. David stepped back, stunned into silence. My father, he was the only one who managed to stay composed, or at least pretend to. He didn't say a word. He just turned around, walked back to the car, and drove off like he was never there at all. I went inside, locked the gate, and sat down at the kitchen table where Emily was pouring a glass of water. Under the table, she reached for my hand, didn't ask a thing. I just held on tight. Since that day, no one called, no texts, no relatives just dropping by. The court confirmation came within the week. Restraining orders were officially filed. Their names were entered into the system. And me? I had finally stepped out of a relationship that had become nothing more than a hollow frame. After everything, I no longer lived for their approval. From then on, I kept helping others, those who had never closed a door on me. My son grew up surrounded by people who loved with their whole hearts. Emily planted more flowers in the garden, smiling a little more with each morning. And me, I still visited the goat farm every Friday, Not for long, just a few minutes, long enough to see myself again, the version of me that once had nothing but hope and a good pair of hands. I used to believe that blood was irreplaceable, that family was absolute. But I was wrong. Blood can slam a door in your face. And strangers, sometimes, they can open a whole new life. And before I close this chapter, I want to ask you, those of you who've stayed with me until the very end, if you were in my shoes, would you forgive? Would you welcome back the ones who pushed you out just because you share the same blood? Would you reopen that door simply because of DNA? Or would you choose what I did, to keep the parts that made you stronger and close the parts that only ever made you bleed? Leave your thoughts below. I genuinely want to hear from you, whether you agree with me or not, because if there's one thing I've learned through it all, it's this: family isn't always where you were born. Sometimes it's the place where, when every other door shuts, someone still opens their arms and says, "Come in." Thank you for listening to this story. Don't forget to subscribe and support our channel. I'll see you again in the next story.